There's a big debate in America right now regarding the legalization of marijuana.
Many states have legalized the use of marijuana for medical purposes, and a bunch of other states are pushing to legalize it for recreational use.
But these debates can lead to a lot of confusion.
Both sides kind of want to prove their point, so they exaggerate the truth. There's that one side that says marijuana is good for you, it's way better for you than cigarettes or alcohol.
It's natural, bro.
It's medicational.
And another side saying is that it's a gateway drug to smoking crack or heroin or whatever.
Hey,
There's even confusion on how marijuana actually affects the brain. How does it make you high?
How does marijuana get you high?
I think when you inhale stuff and smoke goes in your lungs, it will... I don't know how to answer that. It's a really hard question.
Oh, you're asking the wrong person. I've never done marijuana.
The nicotine in it? Is there nicotine? I don't know.
Marijuana is like this thing where the marijuana gods come and then they send like little angels and they take you up to the sky.
I don't know, I guess it gives them confidence.
The Native Americans have been using it for many years.
I know THC just goes into your bloodstream, and then I know something to do with that, but don't actually know why.
Oh, no. I think it's a chemical compound that makes us release dopamine, which makes us happy. Dopamine, if it's released, it makes us really happy. So like, let's say we were to accomplish a task. We release dopamine because we're relieved, we're happy. Or like, you know, when doing something in bed, it makes you happy too. You release dopamine.
So that guy that was talking just now, his name is Peter, and he's actually correct.
But before we talk about dopamine, we first need to understand how the brain works.
The brain consists of a network of cells called neurons. These cells communicate through electrical and chemical signals and process information in our brains. So everything we see or feel in the world around us, the light and the dark, the temperature outside, or enjoyment and pain, it's all transformed into code and interpreted by this network of neurons in our brain. These codes or signals control how our body functions, what we feel, and how we understand the world around us. So for example, when you get caught outside on a rainy Seattle day, it's the signals firing in your brain that tell you that you're soaking wet. And these signals are firing in your brain all the time. Or it's like when you forget to take the compost out and it's been sitting under the sink for a week. It's the signals in your brain telling you that the house stinks.
So neurons consist of three major parts.
First, the cell body, which contains the nucleus. Secondly, the axon, which releases the neurotransmitters to signal other neurons. And lastly, the dendrites, which receive these signals. So to trigger a signal, the neuron first needs to be stimulated. So when the raindrop lands on your head, or you smell the rotting compost, neurons are stimulated, sending a pulsating electrical signal to the end of the axon where there are vesicles or bubbles containing chemicals inside. Then these chemicals are released into the synaptic cleft, which is the space in between neurons, and they bind to the dendrites of neurons nearby. Those neurons become stimulated and the cycle repeats. And within milliseconds, your brain is flooded with these neurochemicals. And your neurons are constantly stimulated and they're active all the time. So everything that goes on in your mind and body are due to these neural signals. We can compare these neurotransmitters to car keys. In order for a car to drive, it first needs a key to start the engine, or your index finger. And this is the same for neurotransmitters. They trigger an action in the body or mind.
And there are 7 main neurotransmitters in the brain.
These include epinephrine, or more commonly known as adrenaline.
This is the chemical that makes you feel energized, like in a dangerous situation such as a fight.
And another neurotransmitter is serotonin, which gives you a feeling of well-being.
Or dopamine.
Dopamine is the neurochemical that Peter was talking about earlier, and it's responsible for feeling pleasure.
For example, when you're listening to your favorite song, the neurotransmitter dopamine is released and you feel pleasure. Or like when you eat a burger from Zest Takeout in the South End, dopamine is released here also, and once again you feel good. Or on the flip side, when you hear a song you aren't feeling, the opposite happens. Dopamine is suppressed and you start feeling irritated, and this makes you want to turn it off. So dopamine makes us feel pleasure, and marijuana affects this process. Dr. Grant Story is a professor of neurology at the University of Washington, and he explains how this works.
To kind of understand how marijuana works, you kind of have to understand how all drugs work. And so for a drug to have an effect in the brain or any part of your body, let's say like pain medicine, like helping you with a sore muscle or something, it has to have some place that's called a receptor site, or some place that drug and goes and binds and it interacts with another molecule in your body. So marijuana mimics molecules that you already have in your brain, and those are called endocannabinoids. And those endocannabinoids help do things like sort through memories, they help you regulate your appetite, and in some cases they can help kind of deal with pain. So they're kind of like their own natural painkillers. And so when you smoke marijuana, marijuana has chemicals inside of it called cannabinoids that look and are shaped just like those molecules in your brain, and so they can have the same effects because they can bind the same receptors.
So back to the car analogy. If you think of neurotransmitters as car keys, then the chemicals in marijuana would be like a counterfeit key or a fake key. And this fake key hijacks the process in your brain for feeling pleasure and causes a temporary increase of dopamine.
So marijuana causes an increased level of dopamine inside the brain, which can lead to intense pleasure or euphoria, or in other words, makes you feel high.
So what about these arguments that say marijuana is unsafe or that it makes you stupid?
According to Dr. Story, marijuana affects the parts of the brain responsible for short-term memory, and this can impact learning.
So people that are on marijuana, they have a harder time remembering in the short term, and they also have a harder time learning things in the short term. That doesn't mean if you stop using marijuana that those functions come back, or you can learn or you can remember just as well as somebody else, but it affects you when you're using marijuana. So it's just like, let's say you're trying to learn math and you don't go to math class for a month. Are you going to learn math as well as somebody who was in class for that entire month? No, you're not. And so is it a misconception that marijuana causes people to be more stupid? I don't think the scientific evidence can prove that, but what we can say is that marijuana influences people's ability to learn in the short term when they're using. And so when you influence your ability to learn anything in the short term, you're not going to learn as well as somebody who, let's say, was there studying or doing their homework, that type of thing.
But is marijuana actually addictive? Some people say that because you can't overdose while smoking weed, it must not be addictive.
But according to Delaney Notnieris, a substance use disorder counselor, addiction is actually determined by a number of criteria listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM.
There are things like giving up social activities or activities that you normally like to do and giving them up in order to use substances. So instead of going to your baseball game, you go use with some friends, after school. Another one of those things is an increase in tolerance, which means you have to use more of the substance in order for you to get the same effect. So a lot of people will start smoking a little bit and they get high, but then they'll realize they have to smoke even more to get that effect. So that's called an increase in tolerance. A couple other things is if you stop using a substance and you have withdrawal symptoms, that's another big criteria. If it impacts your job or your school, that's another big thing.
To review, here are some signs of marijuana addiction.
Giving up activities in order to use.
Continuing to smoke despite the consequences.
An increase in tolerance.
And withdrawal symptoms when you stop using it.
And usually, withdrawals are the opposite of whatever the high felt like.
So it's a lot of feeling really groggy, it's having trouble sleeping, being really, really irritable is a big one, and like snapping at people and just not being as calm and collected as someone might normally be.
So the brain craves this increase in dopamine brought on by marijuana. And in turn, the levels of natural dopamine are lower when the person isn't smoking, and this is a big part of what makes marijuana addictive. So activities that a person used to enjoy, such as playing basketball or skating, don't give them the same feeling as before. It might even seem boring, unless they're high.
But why do some people use?
According to Delaney, smoking can be a social thing for some youth, a way to connect with others, but for many, it can be a way to cope.
Basically, a lot of the youth today have issues that are going on in their lives that they don't necessarily know how to deal with, and they don't know how to reach out for help. And so they find something that works for them. They could be dealing with something like, bullying and just not feeling safe at school and needing like a way to relax and to, bond with other people. Also, anxiety is a really big one. Depression also is another one. Not that it makes you happy all the time, but it makes you feel happy for that moment.
There's still a lot that we don't know about the long-term effects of marijuana.
We do know that at a very low dose, marijuana can be used in cancer treatments, to treat arthritis, and for people with suppressed appetites. And according to Dr. Story, we also know about some of marijuana's negative effects.
A lot of people report increased paranoia and anxiety if they've been using marijuana for a long time, and especially when they stop using it. A lot of people use it by smoking it. And so it has the potential to have the same type of long-term effects on the lungs that smoking normal cigarettes has. Actually, there's the same number of, if not more, carcinogens in a marijuana cigarette as there is in a regular nicotine cigarette.
With the legalization of marijuana, many youth advocates, counselors, and public health officials are concerned about increased use among young people. A lot of teens see others doing it, they hear that it's actually a medicine, and they think it's safe. Currently, between Franklin High School and Rainier Beach High School, there are at least 6 of these marijuana dispensaries. So this continues to be an issue in Seattle as public officials implement rules around where marijuana can be sold and how it is used.
However, one thing that most people can agree on is that we need more research to understand the long-term and short-term effects of marijuana.
We know a lot about marijuana's effects on the brain.
But there is much more that we need to understand to really clear the air.
And this new information can help youth in making better decisions.